strategy was that I had run out of money. So I bought my first house in 2003 in Vancouver. It was a suited house, and that's kind of it. I was living in it, and I had my first tenant. And at that time, I hadn't really thought of real estate as being my vehicle to being self-sufficient. I was a police officer back then, working for the city of Vancouver. And it took me a couple more years before I stumbled across RAIN. I had a real big knowledge for trying to figure out how to become wealthy without being a cop for 30 years and counting on a pension that may or may not be handled well by the government. And so I really sought to be self-sufficient. So I was listening to talk radio. I came across an interview of Don Campbell, who at that time was the head of the Real Estate Investment Network, or RAIN for short. And that's what kind of led me to moving to Red Deer in 2006. So in 2005, I bought my first fourplex in Red Deer. My husband and I went back to Vancouver. We sold our home and we moved out to Red Deer and started from there. So once I ran out of my own money, because as the market was going up in 2005, 6, and 7, I refinanced and bought more property. And I was looking for more strategies for how can I buy more. And that's when I came across this strategy of agreement for sale. So I really gravitated towards that because you don't need a lot of money. I don't need a mortgage. I don't need to qualify for a mortgage. So it was really learning about how does this strategy work and who really is the person that I'm looking for that would benefit from this strategy. Because at the end of the day, it needs to be a win-win on both sides. So through taking some courses on agreement for sale and kind of figuring it out, I was able to discover over the last 11 years of doing agreements for sale, and I've done more than 60 of them now, really 50% of my target audience are what I call accidental landlords. These are people who did not plan on becoming a landlord and had no knowledge really of what they were doing and got themselves into trouble, either financially or with bad tenants who may have destroyed the property or not paid rent on time. And they were just tired, very tired of having to deal with it all. And so that's really where I focused my marketing attention, not only with realtors, but my own marketing. I used to have a website called I Buy Houses Red Deer. And I used to market through that quite a bit. And I could connect with those accidental landlords. Being a landlord myself, it was very easy for me to build relationship. And building relationship is really important when you're using this strategy, because essentially you are taking over that person's responsibility of their mortgage and their taxes and the insurance, and they need to know that you're going to take care of this property. So you really have to be very open and honest about who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that it matches with that seller. One of my common lines to people was, the last thing I want you to do is to sell me your house if you're going to lay awake at night wondering, is your mortgage going to be paid? I need you to feel 100% at ease moving forward in this. So please don't sign any paperwork until you've taken time to think about it. Here's the name of a lawyer who understands this strategy. Please speak with them first. I want to make sure that you understand what it is you're getting into. So really, when we think about it, the agreement for sale strategy, if I'm using somebody's mortgage, essentially, that means that they may not be able to qualify for another mortgage, depending on their credit situation and their income. So it's really important to ask people what they're planning on doing. So especially if they're living in that house themselves, if they're not an accidental landlord, but they're living in that house, you really need to understand what their motivation is. And are they going to be buying another house or renting? And either way, it's still possible to do an agreement for sale, but the sellers really need to understand that you understand that you've got their best interests. So oftentimes one of the things I'll do with sellers is, if they're thinking that they might want to buy a house fairly quickly, is I send them to a mortgage broker. And I say, I need you to make sure that if you're going to go buy another house while you and I have this deal in place for the next 5 years, that you're still going to be able to get a mortgage. Because the last thing I want to do is prevent you from moving forward with your life. So these are all key phrases that I've used and garnered over the years of meeting with probably hundreds of people at this point, because I don't buy every house I see. But you really need to understand that it's important to help these sellers figure out what their next step is. And by showing that you care about that, it just really helps build relationship. When you think about it, if I'm signing a 5-year agreement with somebody whose name is still on title, still on the mortgage, depending on where the house is, their name still might be on the utility water bill, because that can't always be changed over. Having a good, open, and honest relationship and really understanding where they're at is super important. And oftentimes I actually open up joint accounts with these people so that they can see all those payments are being made. Because really this is an open process. I don't want them laying awake at night wondering, what have I done? So that's always been very important to me. And that's why I don't even advertise anymore. Over the years, I did a lot of advertising. And so people often ask me, where do you find these people who are willing to walk away with little or no money down and just hand you the keys to the house? And so there's several different ways that you can find these people, depending on the rental situation. Sometimes I phone for rent ads if they look like they're the rent ad is not by a professional company, but it looks like it's done by the homeowner. Using a website, I had Facebook ads back in the day, like before it was super popular, Google AdWords, but a lot of it was word of mouth too. About 1/3 of the deals that I've purchased over the years, and Sean Impey being one of my partners on 6 agreement for sales that we did as a bulk deal, that was through a realtor. And so I don't think realtors really take hold of this agreement for sale strategy as much as they should. And my realtor had been around in the 80s, so I was really lucky that he already understood the concept of what an agreement for sale was, and he could explain it to another realtor in a very simple way. And really, when I find it comes to realtors, you need to make sure they understand that they get paid up front. They don't have to wait for their commission. They get paid up front. And because what realtor really, Devin, wants to wait 5 years to get paid, right? Nobody.
Not this guy.
So, you have to explain how an agreement for sale is going to be a win-win for everyone involved. And so, like I say, I've probably done about 20 deals through my realtor over the years, where it would be one of two things. One is he knew of an owner, either that was his listing or through his office, that would be open to this strategy and would be a good match, especially if they were a landlord. And so he would approach them and bring me these deals and say, hey, Andrea, I think this is a good deal. You should look at this. I think we can, do an agreement for sale on this. Or I had him set me up on his what's called PCS, but it's just a platform used to track what am I interested in. So really what I looked for agreement for sale houses, if I was looking at single family houses, because most of the single family houses, I would actually do a rent to own exit on them. So I wanted a single family house, minimum 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, at least 1,000 square feet above grade, had to have a garage and a basement development. So if it checked all those boxes and was in a decent area, I knew that I could fill it easily with a rent-to-own client. and it should be a basic enough house that it would be easily marketable as a first-time home buyer. So in Red Deer here, I look for kind of a purchase price between $250 to $325. If you get too much higher than that, then the amount of potential buyers really goes down. So I was really targeting the most active price point. So if you were to pull the stats from your local market, whether you're in Stettler, like Dwayne, I think it was, is, or whether you're up in Edmonton, like Devin is, or St. Albert, like Sean, I looked at what's my first time home buyer price point. And that's really focused on that price point, because I needed to get the highest amount of potential people through those doors. Whether it's marketing these properties on Kijiji, or I used to do, if you go to the dollar store and you get those poster cardboards. So I get like fluorescent yellow, green, pink, and I take the marker, and these are like the ugliest signs ever, right? But ugly works. So it would say rent to own or seller financing, no bank qualifying. And I would have these like 4-foot wooden stakes, and we'd staple those poster boards on there. So like seriously, the ugliest houses ever, right? Or ugliest, not houses, sorry, signs ever, but they attract attention. And so you put them around, you know, the block, and I would do open houses on these places. And oftentimes I'd bring a mortgage broker friend with me so that she could kind of pre-qualify people, because that's another important part when you're looking at a rent to own, but I'm not here for rent to own, so I won't go too far into it. But my intention really was to find these single family homes at a good price point so I could fill them with good quality tenants. So on getting back to my realtor, so I had him set me up on a search, and I would say to Ivan, okay, so what's the average days on market? If it's 60 days, let's double it. Okay, so we have the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, fully developed single family house with a garage between the price point of $250 and $325. And it has to be vacant, or say immediate possession in the comments, and at least 120 days old, meaning I get it when it's already been sitting there. So logically, how many people want to be making mortgage payments on an empty house for 4+ months? Nobody I know. And whether those people were already accidental landlords or were about to become accidental landlords, that was a real good target market for me. And so I would look at those listings and I would say, okay, Ivan, here's the ones that I want you to call. So he would call them and say, hey, I have a buyer interested. She can close in less than a month, but here's the deal. It's a seller financing, and this is how it works. And so I got a lot of deals that way. So you don't necessarily have to be making cold calls to people, but you can reduce the amount of properties that you're looking at simply by using the different metrics that work in your area. So like I say, that first time home buyer price point for me was perfect. That's what I was looking for if I was looking at a single family house or a half duplex or a townhouse. So through the years, I really focused on those accidental landlords. And my other focus was on people who needed to sell, not wanted to sell. And there's a huge difference in that. So through my marketing, I would get people call me, and oftentimes they would want to know how it works, but they weren't really all that motivated. And so I would do some kind of pre-qualification type questions. But to give you an example, if somebody was to call me or I was call them, because I used to search on Kijiji and I would type in my parameters, right, to the limited amount of listings I'm looking at. And I wanted for sale by owners more so than realtor ones, because the realtor ones I could already deal with on my other search. But essentially I would put in keywords like moving, must sell, open to offers, all those types of keywords. And I would phone those people and I would say, can you tell me a bit about your house? So they would tell me all about their house and I would write down all the info. And some of the key questions you need to ask are regarding motivation. And being Canadian, a lot of people are very private about the information they want to give. So saying key things again, like, if you don't mind me asking, why are you selling your home? With very much interest. And that would soon tell you whether that person was going to be an ideal client or ideal person for you to look at their house. So when people would tell me things like, well, we're downsizing, we're upsizing, we're not under any financial distress, we just want a different house, most of the time I know those people aren't going to work for me. But if they said, you know, I'm so tired of being a landlord, or I can't make the payments anymore and I have to sell before I go into foreclosure, then I know those people are more likely the ones that I'm going to do business with. And so you're probably wondering, besides accidental landlords, really my other target market of people that I seem to buy houses from the most are people that are not necessarily in financial distress, but they've moved for a job, or they've gotten divorced, or whatever the reason is they just need out. It's not necessarily financial per se, but they just needed out, and they needed out quick before they started missing payments because they've already moved or whatever. So oftentimes they're just vacant homeowners. So that group of people I focus on as well. You're probably asking yourself, though, I'm sure, because I could probably talk for hours, but why do people sell their houses like this besides your accidental landlord? And, you know, when people have had enough, usually there's two main reasons. They need a certain price because they need to pay out debt, so they need access to equity, or they're just tired. So it's a situational thing. It's nothing to do with money. And it will surprise you how many people will be willing to walk away with $1,000 moving money, or a couple $1,000 because they need a damage deposit and first month's rent for wherever they're going if it's owner occupied. Or if they're a landlord, no money down. And I have bought so many houses with no money down simply because I took over the problem. And that's what I am. I'm a problem solver. So me offering to take over people's payments solve their problem. So what I would do is when I'm talking to these people on the phone, pre-qualifying whether I think I can do business with them, I ask them about their house, like I mentioned before, why they're selling, well, how soon they need to move is very key as well, because it gives you an indication of the level of motivation. And then what I would do is I would tell them a little bit about me. So my script would go something like this. Well, thank you very much for telling me about your home. It sounds lovely. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I buy houses as a business, so this isn't a house I'm going to be living in if I was to purchase it. There's two main ways that I buy houses. One is I pay all cash for properties that need a significant amount of renovation, and most of the time it's not those type of houses. So I would say, it sounds like your house is not one of those. So the second way that I buy houses is I take over people's payments. And simply what that means is I'll take over your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, and all the maintenance on the house for a period of time. And depending on how much equity you have, we can work out something for that. Would that be of interest to you? And then it's either a yes or a no, or can you tell me more? And so I use that kind of script to just pre-qualify people so that I'm not wasting too much time, because I'm really only looking for the people who are looking for me. They just don't know they're looking for me, but I'm the solution to their problem. And from there, from having those initial conversations, if their answer was yes, or can you tell me more, I find that it's very difficult to talk with people about numbers over the phone. They don't really have an understanding of doing math very quickly in their head. unless you're Sean MP, I gotta say, that guy is amazing. He can do numbers like nobody's business. So kudos to you, Sean. So anyhow, I would go to people's houses and then I would just simply ask them to give me a tour of the house and ask them questions as we go along the way. How old their furnace was or the roof or about the neighborhood. And it's more just building that relationship. And then we would sit down at the kitchen counter or at the kitchen table and I would just explain to them how it worked. And really, I would just use a simple blank piece of paper and I would just take my pen and write down, I'm going to pay your mortgage, taxes, insurance, and all the maintenance on the house. And then ask them some numbers. So if you don't mind me asking, how much is your mortgage? Oh, your mortgage payment is $1,200. Okay. So, and how much is your taxes? $250. Perfect. And your insurance, another $100. Okay, we add that all up. Say it's $1,600. Okay, so your payments are $1,600 a month. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So how much do you think your house would rent for if they had any clue? Then I would write that down. Okay, well, great. And how much do you think the house value is worth? And that's very interesting. When you talk to older people, they like seniors, they think the tax value from whatever city they're in is the value of the property because that's what they're paying taxes on. And so you have to do a little bit of educating there. The tax value can be more or less. Quite often it's not what it is. So, what's the least that you would accept? So really it's finding out what their mortgage balance is. So let me give you my typical example. Let's say, so if you have a pen and paper, let's do this math together here because I'm not a slideshow person. So get a pen and paper and write down 300,000. So let's say they think the value of the property is 300,000 and I don't comment with them while I'm sitting at their kitchen table whether I think it's 300,000 or not. We just do the math as to show them. Okay, so I'll say, well, how much is your mortgage? 270. Okay, so they think their house is worth 300,000 and they owe 270 on a first mortgage. Great. Okay. So in this market, even if it wasn't COVID, but in this current market, if you were to get an offer today at 290, you would probably take that offer. I mean, that's pretty close to asking price, right? And they'd say, oh yes, absolutely. Probably even 285 they'd take. But let's just use 290 for now. So write down 290 on your piece of paper under your 300,000. And if you were to sell with a realtor, and let's say in this case it's a for sale by owner, it's probably going to cost you about $14,000 because most people, if they don't sell it on their own, they are going to end up using a realtor. So I'll just say, let's just estimate it. It's about $14,000. Okay, so now if we take that $14,000 off of our 290, we're left with 276,000, right? Well, let's say the place needs a new roof. Well, that's going to cost us about $5,000. So we're going to take off $5,000. So now we're down to 271. Okay, so if I was to offer you 271, so essentially I'm going to take over your mortgage, taxes, and all that stuff that I said I was. So really you're down to 271. Yes, okay, I understand that. So if I was offered to take over your mortgage for what you owe and give you $1,000 moving money, are you okay with that? And most of the time they say yes. It's simply because I've done the math with them for them to understand I'm not lowballing them by not offering them 300. They think it's worth 300, but once you get down to reality and you do the math with them, they're better able to understand that when you take off all those costs, even though they're not using a realtor, most people will end up using a realtor, so it's still a cost. It's very reasonable for me to give them $1,000 and for them to go on their merry way. I find when I do the math with them, it really opens up their eyes to what the true amount of equity is that they have in a property. Now, let's say, for example, if this person was to say, well, I'll sign on the dotted line for 5 years with me, but I really need $5,000. Am I going to say, no, I'm not going to give you $5,000? Of course not. As long as it's reasonable and I feel comfortable with that, I would happily give them $5,000 so they can pay the lawyer fees, which for the lawyer that I recommend to my sellers in Red Deer is about $1,200. And then they've got a damage deposit and first month's rent for wherever they're going if they happen to be living there. So those are the kind of conversations that I have with sellers. And when I do the math, they have an understanding. And essentially, I don't overwhelm them with the legal paperwork. So Danelle had asked me earlier today, was I going to screen share? Did I need to screen share? And I said, well, I don't want to bring up the legal paperwork because it's going to put people to sleep. But essentially, all the legal paperwork it's the same purchase and sale agreement that we all normally use. I use the area contract. So it's the same one that all the realtors use. There's just one extra page that covers off your financing details. So it just says, here's the address, here's, your first mortgage payment, here's your taxes, here's your insurance, and there's a couple other things, the date that I'm making the first payment, and we sign that. And that just forms part of your purchase and sale agreement. And then when they go to the lawyer's office, the lawyer is going to write a document that's like a mortgage between you and me. And all it says is I'm going to pay those mortgage taxes, insurance, and all the maintenance on the property for the next 5 years. That's as much as I explain to sellers on the legal aspect of it. And that's why it's very important to be able to give them a lawyer who understands these transactions. So you need your own lawyer, and you need a lawyer to recommend to your sellers. So for those of you in the Red Deer area, the lawyer I use is Glenn Cunningham at Alta Law. The lady that I refer everyone else to is at a different law office at Warren Sinclair, and her name is Rhonda Elder. Now, she may or may not be the best person for a newbie to use or to recommend, because I have received calls from Rhonda Elder over the years saying, this couple is going to be doing an agreement for sale with this person. And I'm like, well, I've never heard of that person, but they might have got your name through my network. So just be cognizant, if you don't have a reputation, Rhonda's going to be a lot harder on you in terms of the legal documents that she wants than she is on me, because I have a track record of following through with my contracts over the last 10, 11 years. So that's why it's easy for me at this point to simply take the deals that I want to take. I don't make any cold calls anymore or anything like that. I did hear a few people mention that they are doing multifamily. So this can also easily be used in multifamily and commercial. In fact, on the commercial side, if you were buying, say, an industrial property or maybe retail, it's actually more common than it is on the residential side. And so it just depends what you're looking at. Obviously, the paperwork is somewhat similar, other than you're going to be dealing with probably a corporate mortgage rather than a residential one. But this strategy can easily be used for that as well. It can be used across Canada. So if you invest in different provinces, I would say that the real key, though, is to find those two lawyers, one to represent yourself and one to represent the seller. Because if you don't have two lawyers that can agree and feel comfortable with the transaction, it's never going to go through. So I know that that's, excuse me, probably been the biggest challenge as I have traveled with the McGuires to British Columbia as well as to Toronto teaching this course. So talking about the McGuires, they really are the only resource that you have specifically for this agreement for sale strategy. For those of you who are familiar with Barry McGuire, he is a real estate lawyer, and he has a course that specifically teaches people on the legal aspects of it as well as the practical aspects of agreement for sale. So he's really the best resource. I think they might have a work study program. I don't know. I don't get paid for it. And I don't get paid for talking about them, but you could contact the McGuires if you were interested in taking some training on it. Probably rambled on for a little while here. So maybe we'll open up for questions in case I missed something, because I know people like Sean MP know quite a bit about agreements for sale. So yeah. Oh, Devin had a question. They're thinking of doing it in May or June. Yeah, we were supposed to be doing a wholesaling course with the McGuires in May or June, but I don't know, depending on COVID, what will happen with that. But I do believe Donna has a work study program if you want to do agreement for sale, because they've professionally recorded by video and audio a bunch of our sessions. So other questions or things I didn't cover?
Maybe clarify that there's a future closing date when you take possession.
Yes, that's a great point. So as Sean mentioned, there is an end date to these contracts. They're not open-ended. Typically in this marketplace, I'm not doing anything less than 5 years, but we typically match it up to when a person's mortgage is renewing. So if their mortgage renewal is a year from now, our contract can still be 5 years, but I try to have the end date in congruency with when the mortgage would be ending, to reduce our mortgage payout penalties. So how we handle it when people have a mortgage coming up for renewal in a year is you can actually get a power of attorney over that mortgage, so that when the mortgage renewal comes, you just sign on the dotted line for a 4-year term. That's typically how we handle that. Great point, Sean.
Had any resistance from lenders to renew under agreement for sale, power of attorney?
Well, that's a great question, and I haven't, because I don't use powers of attorney. But usually what happens is the seller will contact me and say, okay, this is what the bank's offering me. Which one do you want me to take? And so I just tell them which term I want them to take, and they sign it. So it hasn't been an issue for me, but that's a good point, Sean. You know, I think as long as you've got your documents in place, from what I understand with Barry and some of his other clients, it hasn't been an issue.
Did you ever used to do power of attorney? And why do you not use power of attorney now?
So no, I've never used the power of attorney. And when I first started this strategy, it really wasn't one of the documents that my lawyer was concerned about. It's more been in the past few years in helping the McGuires with their course. That's something that Barry really prefers for his clients to do. So I don't use Barry as my lawyer simply because I have one in Red Deer who understands the strategy. And I find there's a better synergy when you have two lawyers who really know each other well in town, which is what I have. And so the paperwork on an agreement for sale can be done very quickly, within a few days. Even.
Are you pretty much at a point now where you don't get any pushback about the seller using the lawyer that you recommend for them?
Very rare. And I think, Devin, it's partly how I explain it to people. I mean, they're certainly welcome to use any lawyer that they want, and people have in the past. But my condition is, if they're not using the lawyer I'm recommending, who fully understands the strategy and is very reasonably priced, then if they're going to use somebody different, then that lawyer has to call my lawyer. It's very confusing when the lawyer is asking their client, who's then asking me for clarification on something. So I tell them they just simply have to call my lawyer, and my lawyer can answer their lawyer questions directly. And we have worked with other lawyers, and it's never been an issue.
You want to talk about mortgage pay down and who gets it?
Great. Yes, thank you, Sean. So under the terms of the agreement for sale, for the most part, what I do now is all the mortgage payout or mortgage pay down goes to my benefit because I'm making the mortgage payments. But you can use as a negotiating, or if the seller's really hardcore about receiving the mortgage pay down to their benefit because they're doing seller financing for you, it can go to them. So it's a matter of negotiation. And I think the only time I've ever done it is with our deal, Sean, that we did. And it was probably my lack of experience back then. And also the fact that he was the guy that we bought our properties from already had a lot of rental properties. So
He's a bit of a hard ass.
he was. Yes,
But we still got him.
we did. We
10
did.
years. 10 years. 2010 we bought those, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Still in
Um,
a,
Oh, sorry.
that property is still in an agreement for sale, or if you've taken over?
No, we took over. So I think that was a 2-year term. So it just gave us time to get mortgage ready and to proceed. Yeah.
There's actually six properties, 3 side-by-side duplexes in Sylvan Lake.
Yeah.
What about high equity agreement for sales? You painted a good picture about low or no equity in the deal. Can you walk everybody through how you would do a high equity deal?
Certainly. So there's a few different ways to do it. So let's use the same $300,000 perceived value. Let's say the person only has $80,000 on their mortgage. Now, if they want to access some of their equity, what I ask them to do is either to ideally just refinance for 80% loan to value, which would be $240,000, and take that difference out, and I will pay the higher mortgage value, or depending on how much money they need, take a line of credit that is not readvanceable and take a line of credit for that chunk, and I'll pay the first mortgage and the line of credit. So it really depends on what that person needs, but you'll be surprised. I've had somebody who only owed $80,000, and I think I gave them $5,000 down, and they didn't need any money. It was a rental, and they were just tired landlords. So they didn't even need equity. They just wanted something, some skin in the game.
Can you explain for me how the sale process works when you put a rent-owned tenant in the property afterwards, and that rent-owned tenant's ready to buy? The property's not in your name yet. Do you have to transfer title first?
So that's a great question. So oftentimes what happens is the rent-to-own client's going to get qualified, and that mortgage broker or banker is pulling title on the property, right? Because they're looking at a contract between my corporation and, let's say, my rent-to-own buyer is Betty Jane, but John Doe's name is still on the title. So they say, okay, you're buying a house from Andrea, but John Doe's name is on there. That's where they see my caveat. So I explain to them, if they pull the caveat, they can see that that property has been sold to me with the financing in place. So that's how everything moves along. So in practical reality, the deal is going to close between myself and John Doe in the morning, and that same morning it's going to go from me to my rent-owned client. So it's called a simultaneous close. So we close one right after the other. So I never have to bring money to the table to fund anything.
Double close is another word for it.
Yeah. So we've never had issues with it. And I know people bring it up and they're like, how does that work? We've never had issues with it. The best way to explain it is if you were building a house in a Melcor development, as an example. So Melcor owns the development, Truline is building your house, and you're the one that's going to be buying it. On that same day, when you actually take title, it goes from Melcor to Truline to you all on the same day. It's like a simultaneous close. So it's very standard. It's just people have a lack of understanding around it. Yeah.
I have another question then. What about security for the homeowner in the case of a tenant destroying the property? What happens in that kind of case?
Yeah, so oftentimes when I'm at the kitchen table, I go over people's 2 most common fears. That is one of them. The second one being, what happens if I don't pay? So because I'm a business person, and I'm buying this house as a business, and most of my money is made when I actually cash in at the end of the day, like 5 years from now, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that those payments are made, because my profits at the end of the end of the term. In terms of tenants doing damage, I tell people most likely what I'm going to do with your house is put in a rent-to-own client in there who is going to qualify for their own mortgage, sometime in the next 5 years. These are not regular tenants. These are people giving me $10,000 just to move into your house. There is a very low likelihood of them destroying it when they're giving me $10,000. Also, all my rent-to-own clients have to go see the mortgage broker first, and they have to be pre-qualified by them before they move in and give me any money, because the last thing I want to do is put somebody into the house who can't afford it. The second thing is the insurance that I carry, which is in their name, but I'm listed as the contact person. So if there's ever an issue, I can deal with it directly. And I would also be the one paying out any deductible. But my insurance policy covers up to $25,000 of vandalism, should something ever happen.
Perfect.
Other questions?
Have you ever had a client who wanted to buy another property and had an agreement for sale with you and ran into qualifying issues because of the way the contract was set up?
No, because in those cases, Sean, when I know somebody's wanting to buy another house, before I sign any paperwork with them, I have them talk with the mortgage broker. So typically what I do is I will sign like a lease agreement that would cover off the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. And they would give that to the mortgage broker to say, here's the person, rather than confuse them with the whole agreement for sale strategy, here's the person that's taking over the responsibility, for the property. So here's essentially the rental income I'm getting. So they're qualifying as if they're keeping it as a rental.
And that's what you were supposed to say. So
Yeah.
it's not normally, you don't normally have a lease on an agreement for sale.
That's right.
Right.
But before I sign any paperwork, yeah, we want to make sure we're not preventing them. So as long as they have good income and good credit, it's quite often possible, and I have had a number of success cases like that.
Yeah, I've seen some agreements where the only money going into the bank account of the seller is the mortgage payment. So that ends up being, quote, the rent, which is, of course, is probably half what they need, because
Right.
they still got to pay taxes and stuff. And if this buyer, the AFS buyer, is actually doing the taxes direct or insurance and everything else direct, so there is ways to set it up properly to make people qualify. It just has to be looked at properly. So
Yeah.
So to clarify, you're doing an agreement for sale or a purchase agreement, basically, and a lease? Just giving two?
I'm only doing a lease with somebody when they need it in order to qualify for another mortgage. So only in that scenario would I do up a lease between me and the seller so that they can qualify for another mortgage. It's very rare that it happens, but.
And there's creative ways to write up the lease that you may give them some of maybe the down payment money over time as part of a lease or something, so they can show a higher rental income. So
yeah,
just a thought, that way I've seen things done.
Great. Other questions?
I'm curious in regards to anybody that, and would you deem this as not motivated enough, but somebody that might say, well, I want to benefit, the market looks like it might be trending up. So if this is a 5-year agreement for sale, this house is going to be worth a lot more than it is now. So I want to share in some of that appreciation. Have you ever done a deal like that? Have you ever?
No. No.
Yeah, question you asked like that a lot?
No, no. So people have an understanding that the sale price is set today. Because if we have some future value out there, I don't know how I'd ever qualify based on that. Because really what I use an agreement for sale strategy on, especially over a 5-year term, is if we go back to the $300,000 example, so let's say the value is 300,000, right? As we talked about before, the perceived value. If I have 5 years of principal pay down and I'm buying it for say 270 to make round math, if I'm buying it for the mortgage value of 270,000, and let's say I only get $5,000 a year of principal pay down, so at the end of that 5-year term, I only owe $245,000, right? So let's hope that during that time it has gone up. But if it hasn't, even if it stayed the same, I almost have my 20% down there. I only need to put in $5,000 in order to qualify for that mortgage. So I use agreement for sale as a strategy of gaining a down payment over time because I have that benefit of the principal pay down. Plus, I'm hopefully buying it at a bit of a discount as well from day one.
That's another reason you really want to know what the value of the mortgage is and how many years into the term as well, because if it's an early mortgage and they're only into it for the first year or two of their mortgage, the principal pay down is quite a bit less than if they've had that mortgage for 10 or 12 years, right? So not all pay downs are created equal. So you could make a lot more money on someone who's had the property for 10 or 12 years and had a mortgage on it, right? So
absolutely. Great point, Sean. Yeah.
That's where you find the mortgage on spin too and look at the terms and conditions and when they had it. And
yeah, exactly. Other questions?
What is the longest time you've had a property sit before you found a rent-to-own tenant in it? And do you have kind of any exit strategy in that kind of case?
Yeah, so probably 90 days is the most that I would wait to find a person. If I can't find a person within 90 days, then I would just get a regular tenant in there. So, in this current rental market, it's not super great for a rent-to-own strategy at the moment. So when I'm buying properties, so I just did one earlier this year in February in Pinoca, on a 5-year term. So knowing that most rent-owns are not 5 years regardless, I chose to put a tenant in right away. So if I have a tenant in there for at least 2 or 3 years, then I can re-examine whether it's a good time to do a rent-to-own. So typically what I do in terms of analyzing these properties is I always want to analyze them as if they're a long-term buy and hold. Because if they don't cash flow, if the mortgage rate is too high, if they're paying too high an interest rate and it doesn't cash flow, then I don't want it. If it's a $1,600 rental, but their mortgage is $1,800, I'm not buying it. I'm not going to take the risk that I may or may not find a rent-to-own client who would then pay extra rent above that $1,600 to compensate for the perceived negative cash flow.
Mm-hmm. So do you ever wait to sign until you find a potential tenant buyer? Like, do you have kind of...
Yeah. So if it's a property that I'm unsure about, then I will put in the conditions suitable to me finding a rent-to-own client. Okay. And so that's my exit out. If I don't find a rent-to-own client suitable to me, then I don't buy it. Okay. Yeah. Other questions?
What does your realtor make off a typical agreement for sale? Obviously not full pop, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the realtors I work with in Pinoca, she just charges a $5,000 flat rate, and she's representing both buyer and seller. So she's representing both of us. And so she would just bring me deals, and she'd just phone me and say, Andrea, I've got another one for you. You want to come meet them? So she'd already have them on board before I even got there. And she said, well, if you like the house, sign here.
So the $14,000 or $13,000 on that $300,000 house goes to $5,000. So
exactly.
So do you use that $5,000 number in your tabletop discussion or whatever you have with the seller?
Not necessarily. So when I'm dealing with for sale by owners, I always use the higher number because typically that's what would happen. So when I'm working with my realtor in Pinoca, she just does a $5,000 flat rate. And usually I'm buying it still at a, not necessarily 10%, like I like to get at least 10% off the price, but it's not always 10%. But if it's the term's long enough and I like the house enough, I'll take it.
You ever bought one off MLS with full pop realty fees included?
Maybe once. I try not to. Usually what I find is, because I don't work with just one realtor, is at this point, you know, realtors bring me the deals, and so usually it's their own client. So it's much easier to just do the $5,000 flat rate.
I would think that the for sale by owners, when you present to them the real estate fee, they would kind of balk at that, saying, well, that's why I'm not using a realtor. I don't want to pay that fee. Do you find that?
Sometimes, but what I say to them is, well, statistically, most people in your situation will end up using a realtor. And, you know, if their motivation is to sell, we continue that conversation. But if their number is the number, and they say, I'm not selling this for what I owe, I need at least $15,000 cash, then okay, so for $15,000 cash, now I need a 7-year agreement for sale, because now I'm paying more than I want to for it. So you can negotiate extra time in lieu of, you know, so it's all just depends how you want to do it. And people often ask me, how do you choose numbers? And I'm like, well, I just choose them. I just throw them out there. So, you know, I often say to people, how much equity do you need now, and how much can you wait for? Because the more you need now, the less purchase price I'm willing to pay, because any money I give you, I have to get from somebody else at a double-digit interest rate. So in order to compensate that, now your price has to come down. So let's say, for example, they had a mortgage of 200 instead of 270. So now their perceived equity is $78,000, because I've already done the math down to 270. So if they say, well, I want all $70,000, and I say, well, I'm not going to give you $70,000, but I might give you 50, which usually I wouldn't do, but 50 is a lot of money at a purchase price like that. But if they wanted a lump sum money, it's going to cost them, and the cost comes off the purchase price. So, yeah.
They can always say no to what you offer, right? So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question. If somebody wanted some coaching on actually doing a deal like this, do you offer coaching services or?
Yeah, I do occasionally help people out. It just depends how much they need in terms of coaching. Yeah.
You said you run some mastermind groups. Is that something that people can look into, or?
Yeah, I have a real estate group in Edmonton and one in Calgary, and we meet once a month in person. And then I also have an online mastermind with some women from Vancouver area as well as in Alberta. So I actually don't have a mastermind here in Red Deer, but I could always start one, I suppose, if I had enough people interested. But yeah.
Perfect.
Mastermind's is quite different than doing coaching, because really the mastermind is about 3 main things. It's about problem solving, it's about accountability, and goal setting. And so it's a very structured kind of event, and the idea is to really move people forward beyond their barriers as a group. And accountability is one of those pillars, because if you don't do what you say you're going to do, then we need to talk about why that is. So it's really about pushing people out of their comfort zone and getting them thinking about solutions instead of focusing on problems.
Barry McGuire's course is great for AFS and all the other creative stuff. So
Yeah,
worth the dollars he charges. So
It is. And like I say, I'm pretty sure they've got a home study type course where you're going to see me anyhow. So, yeah.
It's great. Well, thank you so much. You've been a wealth of knowledge. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else on the group has. So maybe I'll post your details in the Facebook group if anyone has any other questions for you. But if not, thank you everyone so much for attending. Does anyone have any deals or opportunities that they'd like to present to the group quick before we wrap up? See any hands up or anything?
you might want to post Barry McGuire's contact info if on the website as well. If people want to track him down. So
Yeah, that's a great idea.
He just changed firms here April 1, so he's with Field Law now instead of RMLO.
Okay, definitely do that. Well, thank you everyone for coming on and trying this new experience over Zoom. I think it turned out quite well, but we'll keep you posted as to what we're going to do next month. We'll post things on Facebook and, as always, the meetup group. And enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Danelle.
Thank you.
Thanks
Take
very
care.
much.
Finish
Thanks,
my
Andrea.
deck. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Andrea.
Andrea. Bye.
Bye.